Tātou. I'm just going to do a quick karakia. This karakia talks about settling within us all those, what we call kura, and all those treasures from above. It also asks to awaken within us a sense of stillness and peace, and also asks us for our well-being to increase at this time. Whakato mai e, whakato mai taku kura ki te poho miri ai te ringa e. E oho te mauri o te whare whakatau ai o e. E piki te oranga manawa kia tū mokopuna haui. Kia koutou rā kua hau mai nei ki ro te whare o tātou, te whare kōrero nei, te whare matahiko, tēnā tātou katoa. Ko te aroha te tūnui o tō tātou nei whare i tēnei wā tonu, no reira, e hono, e piri. Ka whai whakaaro ki a rātou mā kua mene ki te pō, ngā mate huhua o te wā, ki ngā mate haere, haere, haere atu rā. Rātou ki a rātou, tātou ki a tātou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia koutou ngā mātāwa e kūtere mai nei ki tō tātou nei awa o te aroha, nau piki mai, haere kake mai, ki tō tātou nei kaupapa. Te aroha ki a koe anō, ko te aroha ki Aotearoa whānui, tēnā tātou, nau mai ki tō tātou nei whare. Ko ngā manu e tō mai i te rangi, i tēnei wā tonu, kōrero hia te kōrero o te wā. Kia koe Finn, kia koe Margaret, kia koe Felicity, kia koe Anya, kia koe Faumuina, kia koe te tuakana Chai. Ngā mihi rere kawana ki a koutou, me o koutou ki te mātauranga, ko horo mai nei ki te aroaro i tēnei wā tonu. Kai te mihi, kai te mihi, kai te mihi. Nō reire te whānau, ko te kupu o te wā, ko te aronga o te hā, arā ko te aroha tēnā. Nau mai hara mai ki tō tātou nei kaupapa, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa, te raro.
Karanga mai rā, rārete, koutou o te pūtaitanga o te whakaaro, rā collective intelligence. Tēnā koutou, nā koutou te kaupapa nei, tēnā oki koe, nau i taki i ngā kupu ki rātou i te wā ingaro, kia rarau pai tātou i roto i tēnei tū kōrero. E mihi ana, e tangi ana ki o tātou mate, o ki tonu mai ki a tātou te kaupapa tangata, e kimi nei, e rapu nei, i te uara i kia ua mai a Aotearoa, ai oenua take, ai oenua wairawa, mā te katoa, mā te iti, mā te rai, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa.
Tēnā koe.
Kia ora, Chai, and thank you so much. Welcome everybody to this session of Unscripted. This was an idea we had some time ago, and it started with a conversation around how do we raise the emotional intelligence of the country. And why was that a thought is that we're in a time, we've been through a long period of time of peace throughout the world and stability. That's changing, and we have got some massive challenges ahead. And at our first hurdle with COVID, we've done okay in some areas, but we've stumbled in others. And last year, I took this idea to Anya on the call today, and to Felicity, and to Rosalie Nelson. And the challenge came back, okay, well, what does it take to be a great citizen of our country at this time? And I thought that was a fabulous question as well. And then I sat down with Che for breakfast the next morning, and Che said, what does it take to love yourself and your country at this time? And I let that one sit, and we sat on that for 12 months and wondered when it was the right time to bring that conversation forward. And we think the time is right now to bring that forward. My name's Harv. I'm the founder of Collective Intelligence. We're into reimagining leadership. We're into diversity. We love different views. We're developing an ecosystem. And I'm so pleased to see today that we've got the Edmund Hillary Fellowship here. We've got Leadership New Zealand. We've got Auckland University. We've got Che, who represents so many people. And I feel very humbled that everybody that we asked to do this has stepped up and said yes into this space that will not be perfect today. We will not get this right today. We'll not even try to do that today. The panelists have agreed to kick this off, and I'm going to ask them very soon to introduce themselves and why they're here. And then we're going to go to breakout rooms of 4 per breakout room. And we're going to ask you who you are and why you're here. And then we're going to come back and we're going to go to the first 3 panelists and ask them to describe for us what it means to love themselves and this nation at this time. Behind the scenes, I just want to introduce Erica, who is looking after us. Erica is a wonderful facilitator and is stunning at tech, and we have a whole lot of faith in Erica to guide us through this seamlessly. Thank you so much, Erica. We've got Hannah Smith, who's going to co-facilitate and keep me on track when I cock things up and get me back on track. We're going to go to, and we've got Karen and Bettina, who have worked their butts off in the last 5 weeks to make this happen. And to Michelle Goodop, who is part of our team, who was the one that said, you know what, I think this is the time that we should bring this conversation forward. Who's on our panel? So I looked for diversity. I wanted a range of people who thought deeply and had an opinion and would start this. So one of the first people I thought was Anya Satyanand. And Anya, I've got to know in the last 15 months, and it was like meeting a sister. And Anya was straight up and said, yeah, I want to be part of this conversation. So Anya, thank you. We've got Margaret Kouvelis here, who was on our board. And Marg brings just a rich knowledge and depth of experience and wisdom, which I'm really looking forward to. We have Faumuina, who I have not met yet. And Faumuina, thank you so much for saying yes. Faumuina is a fellow Edmund Hillary Fellowship recipient and is a wayfinder, and I'm so looking forward to your views. Faumuina, thank you. We've got Finn Shewell, who has just come onto our board, and Finn, when I first asked him, he said, go and find somebody better. So I did that, and that better person couldn't make it today because I've got a tangi. And so I went back to Finn and I said, okay, mate, can you come back in? And then he picked up the mantle straight away. So Finn, thank you, and I just so pleased to have you on the board. We've got Felicity on the call today, and excuse her, she is Australian, but she's a nice Australian. And the thing I love about Felicity is she's rekindled my interest in Christianity. And that's amazed me, that I'm now having conversations around Christianity that I haven't had for a long time. So that's our panelists, and I'm going to kick off straight away now because so we don't get behind. And just quickly, I'm going to go to Anya first, and she is going to start off, and then she's going to pass on to the next panelist. So Anya, over to you. Who are you, and why are you here?
Well, tēnā koe, Harv, and tēnā koutou katoa to those who have gathered here, the Collective Intelligence whānau, to my esteemed fellow panellists. And most of all, rārite to you for that beautiful karakia to open us up. Ko waiau, ko Anya Satyanand tōku ingoa, no inia whiti me kotirangi o ku tipuna, kei te noho au ki tāmaki makaurau. I work for an organisation called Leadership New Zealand, but kind of more importantly than that, I'm a recovering teacher and youth worker. And when Harv invited me along to this kōrero, I was like, yes, please. Because I think learning our way through the challenges of these times with collective intelligence, like both literally and figuratively, feels really important to me. So I'm really, really interested to hear the kōrero, not only from our panelists, but actually also from all of you about these issues. I think I'm here because holding polarity in a time of increasing division and hearing into lots and lots of perspectives feels very important. So yeah, I'm here to listen. I'm also here to kind of share a perspective, and it's a great honour to be here with you all. So again, tēnā koutou katoa, and I'm going to pass it ako to Che. Over to you, my friends.
Tēnā koe Anya, kia ora koutou. As was said earlier, my name is Che Wilson. I'm from my centre of the universe is Ohakune at the foot of Mount Ruapehu, and I live in Hamilton. I'm here firstly because Harv told me to bloody get here. And secondly, I'm always looking for a conversation as to how we can better ourselves and how we can grow ourselves as people, as groups, and as a nation. Because it's too easy for us to fall into the cliques that we hang out with. It's too easy for us to stay in our lane. And it's also too easy for us to ignore any privileges we might have. And I like having these types of conversations, one, to take me to an uncomfortable space where I can then grow. So hopefully there's going to be a cool kōrero where I can grow, and hopefully we can all grow. Tēnā koutou. I'm going to pass it over to Felicity.
Thanks, Shay. Kia ora tātou, everyone. I, as Harv said, and I'm like you, Shay, it was basically just get on this thing that we're doing. You've got to do this. And I said, but the problem, Harv, I'm not actually a citizen of Aotearoa. And he said, yeah, I know that, but you know, you've got things to discuss. So, you know, come along. You've got to be there. And I am, as I said earlier to my colleagues, it is such a vital conversation, and having a perspective outside Aotearoa, but I've also lived in Aotearoa for somewhere around 20 plus years. And in this context that we're living in the world, where, you know, we are not distinct, we're not different from people in Russia or the Ukraine. We are family. We are all together. We all share the one planet. I have found, as I've been thinking about this, just how much responsibility we each have for being citizens, not just of one country, but of the various different things, whether it's whānau, whether it's, you know, to a whakapapa, to my faith, as I'm sure many of you are. And I really want to hear, this has stimulated a very big conversation, and I talked to many others, and I think we have the opportunity to listen to each other, hear perspectives that we haven't heard before. And I agree with Shay, it's very easy to stay in our busy lives and not really think about these things, and they're hard things to think about. So it's time for us to bumble our way and to think about it. You know, it's so important. So thank you, Harv. Thank you, everyone, for speaking up. As Harv said, be honest and raw, and I think it's absolutely time to do that. So thank you.
Passing off to...
Oh, sorry. Faumuina. Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou te whānau. He meni nui ki te tangata whenua o tēnei motu o Aotearoa no Ngāti Ahoa mō ahau, engari ka whānau au I konei I o taitahi. So my name is Faumuina, title's name from my father's grandmother's side in Samoa. And yeah, so I'm down here in Christchurch where I'd say I was born and raised, but I've also returned 4 times. Each time thinking, yeah, I've had enough of this place and I'm going out into the world, but always coming back through this thing of love. So it's really great to be back in this session because of that. And when Shay was talking about, you know, hey, stay in your lane, well, I'm in here because I actually never stay in my lane. That's when people say that to me. It's like, oh, girl, you got to stay in your lane. I'm like, oh, you don't want me in your team because I'm not that. I'm not going to stay in my lane. Hence, I have a very diverse practice, going from wayfinding and developing strategy for organizations and just ways to, I guess, what I do is take the wisdom from celestial navigation and ocean voyaging and transpose that across multiple types of projects. And that includes even, you know, theatre and, you know, suicide prevention. And yeah, so that's why you see the lane is varied and wide, just like our own Moana out there. And I guess that's why I got called in. And then I talked to Harv, and I wouldn't say he talked me into it, but we were on the phone for a very long time. And also as another fellow, I feel it's, you know, if you say you're going to join a family, and how you get planted into a family is that you turn up and you support them in what they're trying to do. So that's how I got here. I'm going to now pass this is getting a little bit trickier, to Ra, I think. Te rarite.
And I'm going to throw to Finn.
What a parry. Kia ora everyone, I'm Finn. I'm calling in from Wellington, where it is a very Wellington day, quite cloudy, quite windy. I am here because I thought I had successfully parried a prior recruitment attempt to be on this panel, and it turns out that I had not. But I think in another sense, I'm here because I challenged Harv on this and said I was very interested in seeing a youth perspective on the panel. And then he called my bluff and brought me on as a youth perspective on this panel. I am very interested in this conversation because a lot of my work centers around connecting people to causes and people to action. And so I think a big thing that I'm going to be looking for today is how we can convert any of the gems that come out of this discussion into action. And there's been already quite a bit of dialogue about polarity in everyone's introduction so far. So I'm quite interested to see what that looks like and what spectrum we're looking at polarity on, because polarity is really just an umbrella term. It needs to sit within a context. One context I'm kind of interested in could be collectivism versus individualism, because the question does kind of beg that. I'm going to pass back to Ra.
Kia ora. Can I just check in with you, Harv? Are we introducing the panel or?
Well, look, the lovely thing is, Ra, everybody, you were there to give karakia, but you've now found yourself on the panel, brother. So, because we're going to go to Marg next, so sort of my fault, but Ra, why are you here? Why are you?
That's like, this is collective intelligence in play, isn't it?
It is.
Okay, for me, I'm really curious. One of the things that gets me really curious, I love Te Ao Māori perspective and tirohanga. And one of the things we learn in Te Ao Māori is that it's everywhere. And so in this conversation, I'm really looking to see, to kind of mine the gold and see what comes up from our world and the different worlds that we mingle with. I love being able to to see our atu in different places and hear our kōrero in different places and the different language people use to articulate what we do in Te Ao Māori. So that's what I'm looking for, is to kind of see my connection in the presence of my tupuna and all of these other spaces, because they've been everywhere. So yeah, koe tēnā. Kia koe, Marg.
Tēnā koe rā, and kia ora tātou everyone. It's an absolute delight to be here, and I'm here because our dear Harv says we need an oldie Marg. So age now, at 73, I qualify to come on this panel. And as we know, age comes before beauty. So it's just great to be here with all you beautiful people. I'm really humbled and honoured to be sharing this kōrero with you all. And I couldn't agree with the way that each person has introduced themselves and why they're here. And I think we've got definitely synchronicity in the way that we're all thinking. Particularly, I think I'm interested in, I've often said to have the kairos. What is the time to have these conversations? And I think we're in a really unique moment in history. I think that both as individuals and as a nation, we are all one. And I think very much of the situation that we've just been in the last few weeks in Wellington, and what's happening now in the Ukraine. And I'm reminded of our Prime Minister's words, they are us. And can we say that? And can we look at our parallel universes? Because I believe that the time is now that we have the most wonderful, innovative, loving, heart directed people within the different cultures in New Zealand. And my question is, how much difference can we tolerate? Because the more we tolerate diversity, to me, the more we grow, and as Shay said, we become better people. Tēnā koe.
Thank you, Marg. And the thing is, Marg, you know what? If you were 33, you still might make the cut today, you know? And just acknowledging my board members today, Marg, Finn and Rarity, thank you so much for your support. We're actually on time, which is so not me, so I'm very, very happy about that. We're going to go out to a breakout very, very soon for 10 minutes and break you into groups of 4, so you get a chance to speak. And we're interested to know who you are and why you're here in this conversation, because there's a whole lot of other things you could be doing. Before we do that, I'd just like to reflect on how important conflict is. We often don't like conflict, and we see it as a negative. I'm not sure why, but I know in my, as I grew up, I had a huge amount of conflict in my life, and am drawn to conflict and what comes from that. And if you look at the great art pieces that came down in history, so many of them came from these times of wonderful conflict. And so I think that is something that it doesn't concern me. I think that I do get frustrated in New Zealand sometimes that we have such an unbelievably privileged life here that we forget what it's like to be over there in other countries. And so I think it's a chance for us to really respect this conflict that we've got going on, which comes in many forms. As we go into the breakout, you might hear opinions that you don't agree with. You might hear views that don't feel comfortable for you. And I'm going to be asking you, when you come back, how that's landed for you, okay? So, Erica, take us away in your wonderful hands, and 10 minutes, make sure everybody gets a chance to speak. The panelists will be in the rooms as well, to listen, to what's coming up. So please, we'd like everybody to have a say and make sure you give space for everybody. Thank you. Erica, go.
All right, here we go.
Back. Okay, Erica, we're going good? Got everybody back?
Yes,
okay.
Yep, everyone's back. Welcome back.
So what we're going to do now is we're on time because we're keen to get back to those breakout rooms as quickly as possible. I'm going to ask Marg, and so what we're going to do is go the first three panelists. So I'm going to go to Marg first because everybody forgot you, Marg, which is not like you, to kick this next session off with the question of how do you love yourself and your nation at this time? You've got 5 minutes. So Marg, over to you. Or,
Can you hear me?
yep.
Unmute myself.
Go.
Okay. Well, our group's just been focusing on listening, and that was actually where, when I looked at this question, that's where I have landed, is choosing to listen. To listen, first of all, and loving myself to my body. I've been through a journey recently of pain, ended up in hospital with a bad back, and took me out of action for about 5 weeks. And it's been wonderful. I've learnt to listen to pain. I've learnt to discover humour in pain. And I've learnt that my body is not just a vessel for my mortality, but it is mind, body, spirit, heart, emotions, everything. And they're all, of course, interconnected. But coming from my generation, one has been inclined to ignore the body. And I'm ashamed to say that. And so at 73, I'm finally beginning to learn the lesson of looking after my body. And my body has been saying to me for quite a while now, look, you've been making all these promises about you're going to rest more, you're going to lose weight, you're going to do all this, but look, we're sick of those promises, nothing's happened, and so we're going to stage a coup. And so I'm just delighted that the body has taken that initiative and has taught me some very valuable lessons. And so listening and sitting in silence has been one. And when I look at loving myself, I think I want to say that we are but one instrument. Like a violin, we've got 4 strings which vibrate like our organs do in the body, and we can make our own music. But if we band together and we form a symphony, then we need to be in tune. And so how do we develop this in-tuneness with each other? And that has been something that I've been looking at. And I think that when it comes to loving my country, our people, our land, our waters, our unique ecosystem, then how are we in tune with nature? How are we in tune with each other? How are we in tune with our pain, and what do we do about that? So recovering is a way of healing, a process, and I'm really enjoying this recovering process. So I'm interested in how we recover from the pain that we've seen inflicted on our own nation recently and on each other, and I'm interested in how we deal with the pain at the heart of the world. And I'm convinced that it's people, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. It's people who have created the pain, and it's people who can overcome pain with joy and with love. And this is why I say the Kairos, the moment is here now to find influential leaders that will combine the individual aspirations with a collective aspiration. So how do we move and from one to the other? And the other thing I've learned in loving myself is to choose focused attention. Some of you might be aware of Johann Hari, who's written a book called Stolen Focus, and I've been listening to him recently. And funnily enough, it was because I found myself paying attention again to my pain in my body in a way I hadn't before. So how do we pay attention to ourselves? How do we pay attention in our country? And I come back to the building of social capital. I think we've been completely arse about face. in terms of having our financial and believing that our economic principles dominate our social capital. And until we turn that around, I think that we're going to have trouble. I think that we can't stand the gap between rich and poor. We cannot continue to behave as the dominant Pākehā culture in this country. This is completely absurd. And all of these things are where I believe the orchestra cannot make a symphony, and we break down into strong dissonance. The final thing is that I think we need to be authentic. And so choosing to speak in this forum is about being associated with authenticity. I want to be authentic, and being authentic is choosing my response. I can do that best when I'm called to account, when I'm challenged, and then I really am tested as to who I am.
Lovely, thank you, Mo. And I know if we just had one speaker, Mo, we could just go on to you. Thank you so much. Che, over to you, brother.
So kia ora no tātou. When I think about the question, I think about ancestral knowledge, which I call tupuna wisdom. And for me, tupuna wisdom is one of these things that has been relegated to the back of back in the wop somewhere. And I say that because if you do anything to do with science challenges, you can do Māori knowledge, but you've still got to have a real scientist next to it. And what the hell's a real scientist when the basic interpretation of science is the study of observation? And in addition to that, when you go into the detail of tupuna wisdom, there is so much empirical knowledge that it's been kicked to the wop-wops to be forgotten. And I think there's so many solutions. And as Einstein says, you know, problems that have been created in one consciousness, you can't find the solutions in those, you've got to go somewhere else. And so whether it's the West looking more into the East, looking more into Indigenous knowledge or whatever, I think this is a great time for tupuna wisdom. And I say that because as one of 50 first cousins on my mother's side, and then a similar number on my dad's side, I'm the baby boy, so there's one other cousin below me. And so her and I are the babies, and we were entrusted with all of the knowledge because our older cousins, and some of them are the same age as Margaret, our older first cousins all went through that period of urban drift and clash of culture, and never mind that Maori shit. It's not going to get you bread and bacon. And so in an urgent dash in the 80s, Pikimai and I were forced into things that we didn't want to do. We wanted to play with our cousins outside. But it's taken me on a journey to better understand tupuna wisdom and the gifts that tupuna wisdom has, and which I feel can not only help Aotearoa, but can help ourselves. And so every time I see the change in wind, the change or different colours in a sunset, I can go, okay, well, that's such and such and such and such. And then I'll go on Google to see what's happening. And, oh, yeah, that works. There was an earthquake or volcanic eruption in the Pacific Ring. And I'm sharing this because too much of the time, people might be interested in kaitiakitanga or kia ora or the haka, but that's it. And I don't think it's the right thing to force people, but I think we should be allowed to celebrate and be more open rather than people going, oh, when are they going to talk English? because I think we do need to find many bridges to join all of the cultures. And I also think there's a pretty cool bridge waiting for people that are interested in learning about tupuna wisdom. And when that happens, people will see why I love myself and why I love tupuna wisdom and the gems that can help us be a better Aotearoa and be a better globe. Kia ora tātou.
Shay, I'm going to ask you one more question, please. How's the last 3 weeks affected you?
Fuck yeah, sorry. It's been really hard. Like, you know, I shared in my smaller group, you get death threats all the time. And it just is what it is. And the most recent threat is from one of my own. What I'm mindful of, and I have to really lean into my empathy, because people are hurting. People are hurting for many reasons, and COVID and mandates just happens to be an easy issue to latch onto. Like, because I'm a history geek, I'm just worried, and have been worried for some decades now, of the Americanization of this nation. And I'm not talking about American people, but the way capitalism has panned out in the States and how we're just copying every single thing, and it's fucking us up. And I know how much privilege I've got, but fortunately, I have immediate whānau members who are in jail, who are on the dole, who are all these other things that are stereotyped as being Māori, when I know that's nowhere near being Māori. And so the last few weeks have been hard because the pain that my people are suffering is different to some of those other mongrels who are funding the protests. But because the pain is so real, it's just a chance for our people to get out there and say, hey, enough's enough. And I support the sentiment of enough's enough. And I support it knowing my own privilege, knowing that my house that we bought almost 3 years ago has almost doubled in Northern Hamilton, its value. And that's great for me, but it's not great for all of those that are struggling. And this is Che talking. It's not my political role or my tribal role or anything else. And so it's hard because whether you have those other hats or not, when your life's threatened, as it has been a number of times, then your wife and your children, your 80-plus-year-old parents, they get to worry. And how can we share more love with each other? And through that, the empathy and care, the compassion to say, hey, can we help? Rather than draw a line and go, no, those ones on that side of the fuck-offs, those ones, yes, I'll talk to these ones. And when I saw before we opened up at 12:30, saw everybody had different backgrounds, so I thought, well, I'll choose this background, which is the flag that flies at my marae, Ete wi kia ora, which is part of the prophetic movement, the Māori prophetic movement. And King Tawhiao, who was also a prophet, he was the second Māori king, he gifted this flag to Mere Rikiriki. And Mere Rikiriki was a prophetess who was based probably a couple of k's down from where Harv's house is, at Parewanui, on the corner of Paruanui Road and Dalrymple Road. And so he gave her this flag. She gave it to my great-grandfather. And it's a simple message. Good life, good blessings to all.
Ka pai Che, thank you. Two different speeches there. The first one was a bit boring, brother. The second one was a lot better. And Che, I know what you've been through. No, I don't know what you've been through, but I know what you've been dealing with, and thank you for sharing that. Felicity, you want to follow that?
Why, sure. You're funny. What I am, though, is incredibly grateful to Collective Intelligence and to you and what you've done and what you've created over the last 14 or so years. Because I don't know many places where this conversation could be held. And for people to, and how much I've sort of learnt about love as I've been thinking about these sorts of things. And there's love in a whole range of different kinds of ways, but I really appreciate and value, so grateful to what you've created, and that everyone's here. And I when you first asked me, I said, but Harv, I'm not. I'm no one of note. I'm not even a flipping citizen. And you just said that's the point. That's the point. People who can just, sort of think about things and actually have the conversation wherever it is all over the country. And that's why we've got these problems that we have now all over the world. And so thank you, Harv. And I started to think about, okay, so I'm a citizen. There's certain legal sort of response, but there's a certain legal term for that, and it's actually around the sort of being a participatory member of a political community and a few other things and all that sort of stuff. But I don't think of it in that way at all. I realise that what I think of it as is a love for something that's important to me. And unpacking that has been incredibly sort of surprising and taxing, actually. And I think it's going to be a conversation, not just now, but for each of us, I think, is a conversation that needs to go on for a long period of time, possibly even for the rest of our lives, because we'll have challenges to it. I am a legal citizen of Australia. I was born in a country hospital, and for me, that bush, open spaces, big skies, red dirt, gum trees are absolutely seared into my psyche. I seek them. I love them. I love that smell of eucalyptus. I love all those weird creatures that we have here. And like New Zealand, how did that happen? That New Zealand has no animals that can actually kill you. I just find it extraordinary. Australia seems to have all of it. And I love the sort of, that feeling, which I know that people in every country that they love, they're born into. The delights in things like Australian colloquialisms and quirky humour, and you just kind of get stuff. You just get stuff. It's whānau, no matter how different those people are, other people are. But it's genetically and viscerally connected to that country and its people, as I know you guys are to all the ones that you were born into. So there's a love for that land that I know that not everybody necessarily feels that for the place where they're born, but I certainly do. And it shows me that even though I don't live there, there are responsibilities that I have about being respectful of Australia, no matter what people say about Australians, and sort of taking it, not being offended by that, all that sort of stuff. I'm a permanent resident of Aotearoa, and I actually am intending to become a citizen. I'm not entirely sure why I haven't already, but I've lived here off and on for 20 years, and I'm amazed by this little country. It is extraordinary. And it's precious. It's precious to me. It's precious, even though I've got difficulties. It's precious to the world, and I'm not sure that that's understood. And I think that we can do more together collectively to actually express that to the rest of the world, because I think we can do things here that very few other countries can do. And partly it's because we're in the middle of nowhere. and partly because, you know, we have so much that we can talk about and think about if we could get, you know, opportunities to do that. So I feel a deep responsibility for the privilege of living here. And I think that, you know, I've traveled quite a bit, as I'm sure all of you have, and I'm not sure that people haven't traveled outside their country really understand the value of their country and how precious it is to them. I think it is actually. It's just by dint of where you're born that you can be having an experience like Syria or the Ukraine or Russia or here. I mean, we were born into it. It wasn't our choice. It just happened to be. And we should feel deeply sort of thankful and responsible for making that, for making it better, for making things better. And that does mean expressing what we think. And sometimes that can be, you know, in anger and you know, very passionately, but I just think, like you said, Margaret, I think there's something we have to do about, you know, sort of the respect and the compassion that we have for each other if we could learn those skills. It's interesting, I also feel like a citizen of the Antipodes, and it's because, and if there was such a thing, I'd sign up, because we're kind of isolated down here. We're sort of like, you know, we were colonized, and that's been a terrible situation for many people in both countries. We've got a shared history. And you know, either country has not been able to fully understand and respect and to bring forth the wonders of the Indigenous people who live here in these countries, and yet we fought side by side in wars that are not of our own making. And so both countries together, I think it would be really lovely to see that sort of commonality. We have it in some ways, but not in others. So I think there's more to be said about that. And yeah, and there's a freedom here. And I also feel deeply as if I'm a citizen of flipping planet Earth. And for heaven's sake, you know, surely we all feel like that contribution to, actually, we're on a really small planet. And as yet, there's nowhere else to go. So, you know, there's things that we really do need to talk about, and you know, but it's the same issue. The conversation we're having here, we need to have, you know, globally as well. And the other thing that Harv raised, and I'm so entertained by this, Harv, I'm also a citizen of the kingdom of God, and that's clearly not geographical, but it is absolutely a matter of the heart and mind and soul and spirit. And, you know, I belong to a kingdom whose king is my father, mother, and I'm, you know, it's all those words are really, really hard. And I know him to be the most wonderful, love-filled person on the planet, because he is love. That's the cellular structure, the foundation of unconditional love is God in my belief system, in my experience. And his love for his creations, and the relational nature of his love for us is the most important thing. And sadly, human beings have fucked it up so badly. We do it all the freaking time, and like, I could go into that. It drives me crazy, this, and I agree with Che, who is sort of talking about the Americanization. Oh my goodness. And I'm really hoping that through all of this bizarre stuff that's happening at the moment, that we will learn, we'll look to our hearts to sort of to think, okay, hang on a second, this is not right, this is not sitting well, we need something different. And so, you know, from my perspective, being a citizen of the kingdom of God, which is love, and it's not a sort of nice woolly whoopy sort of love. It's a, you know, deep, honest, kind of can be hard love. Actually, I would hope, and I think makes me a better citizen of a place, and whakapapa, actually. It sort of feels like, that's my whakapapa. But again, I want to bring that unconditional love, and that is really, really hard because I don't like some things.
And Felicity, I'm going to have to jump in there. We are short of time, and sorry.
That's it. Done.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, and that's why I wanted you here. Thank you so much. Just two things before we go into breakout room. We're going to have a 2-minute break. Okay, we're about halfway through, so we're just going to get up and stretch your legs. If anybody needs to drop out, I've got to say I'm delighted that we've only had one person drop out of the call, and that's Vanessa, who's got COVID. And Vanessa Smith has just come back to New Zealand and is a facilitator artist. She was going to be creating a piece of art for us today, and she still might, but unfortunately COVID got to her before we could get to this day. So Erica, at 1:39 we're going to go into breakout rooms, so please get up, have a stretch, wiggle around, have a pee if you need to, whatever. Okay, and then at 1:39 we're back here and in the breakout rooms. And the question we're going to drop for you guys is, what has landed for you? What has landed for you? Okay, that is the question. 1:39. Okay, 1:39 is up. Erica, are we there?
Yes.
I think we've
people are coming back.
Yeah, we've lost a handful. I thought let's do that. Unfortunately, Jenny Scott Baddens is leaving. Jenny's in Melbourne, and Jenny and I grew up next to each other back in Manganaka. So just while people are getting settled in, this we have a follow-up conversation next week, because this is just bringing things to the surface. We're interested in, so now what, which is the conversation next week. So we've got a follow-up conversation next week. So this is not just a talk fest and going, what are we going to do with this? Okay, what are we going to do with this? So Erica, when you're ready, okay, the session. Okay, this session is, we're going to go into breakout rooms for 4 people for 10 minutes. Okay, and the question is, what has come up today? Yes, Hannah Sinclair, we will be finished by, a bit after 2 o'clock actually. Okay, we'll be a bit after 2 o'clock. Okay, and Pauline Nelson, she's turned off the video and can't find herself. That happens, Pauline. Okay, so we're going to break into teams of 4. Erica, I have so much confidence in you. I don't know, what's that about? You're so good at this.
I have moved a couple of people around because of the departures. So if you aren't in the same group, don't worry. We will continue the kōrero.
Okay, wonderful. So we're going basically back into the same teams?
Yeah.
Okay, and then the next round we're going to break into different teams. Okay, so this question is, what's come up for you so far in this conversation? Ready?
All right, here we go.
Welcome back, everybody. Okay, we're going to keep moving along. Now, just a reminder that this week's conversation is a starter. We have scheduled to follow up next week and looking and going, well, what are we going to do with this conversation? Okay. And Peter's just said the breakout rooms are too short, okay, to be really useful. Okay, we'll see if we can extend them, Peter. Okay, so I'm going to, and if we could put your little speaker things on mute, please. Thank you. And Anya, let's kick off with you, please.
Well, tēnā koutou. Man, I found that breakout session extremely useful, even though it was very short. And you know, again, just kind of returning to the theme and returning to what does it mean to love yourself love your country, like to me, part of what that looks like, what that love looks like is listening. So really want to mihi to the Collective Intelligence whānau for opening space for us all to listen to one another. Hey, I talked about at the beginning, like holding polarity, and yeah, really heard your whakaaro there, Finn, in terms of what does that actually mean? Like all goods with the big words, but like what does that actually mean? And I think what it means for each of us is probably, it's going to look a bit different, right? And during the last panel session, what I really took away from that is that actually the work for tangata tiriti is really different from the work for tangata whenua, and also just mihi to my sis on the panel Faumuina, it's different again for tangata moana. So like, let's just put that out front. Like these are big kaupapa, right? What does it mean to love yourself and love your country? Well, our relationship to this whenua is different. And so I guess I'm framing my comments through the lens of tangata tiriti. What does it mean to love myself and love my country at this weird time in history? And really, I don't know about you guys, but I've been very influenced by, like, I've been seeking out wisdom from all sorts of different places. And anyone who's been in conversation with me over the last kind of 12 months might have heard me roll out an idea from Margaret Wheatley, which is the idea that leadership at this time requires us to be both hospice for the world that is passing and the midwife to the world that is emerging. And so for me, what that means in terms of loving myself and loving my nation is understanding what needs to be unmade in myself, you know, my biases, my, you know, the things that in my head and heart and gut have kind of replicate patterns of privilege and, you know, the world that is, how can I unmake those in myself? And that's both about loving myself and about loving Aotearoa and really feeling, you know, that another world is not only possible, it's on its way, right? To butcher a quote by Arundhati Roy, that, you know, on a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. How do we love ourselves and love our nation? By each of us understanding how we can be agents of hope. Part of that is about unmaking ourselves and unmaking the systems, the institutions, the organizational kind of parts that need to be laid to rest, recognizing them and working towards that with others. But also, how do we be midwives, right? How do we foster emergence? How do we awhi innovation? How can we, I think in particular, you know, and again, I just mihi to those of you on the call who work with young people or whose work intersects with young people. How do we resource them up? How do we share power with them so that they can architect and be agents of change within this emerging future? To me, that's what leadership is. And it's also to that point of, like, you know, loving yourself and loving your country. I also just want to reference some discomfort that I have. I said this to Harv, like on the road to this event, like I was like, oof, there's so much kind of nationalism and, you know, yuck energy around, you know, closed borders, around looking out for, you know, number one, whether that's not that number one as in me, I, myself, or number one as in like the place that you live. And I've really felt that since March 2020, right? Like the dark shadow of nationalism has dogged our incredibly effective COVID efforts so far. So how can we also interrogate that? How can we unmake it as we call it forth? How can we together, right, like critically engage and emerge this this future? How can we, you know, and I say, you know, I don't also want to kind of push all the responsibility for making the new to our young people, because each of us have evolutionary energy in us, and that's why yous are all on the call as well, right? So like, how do we both act as responsible hospices, as responsible midwives? How do we attend to the humanity of what is dying right now and also what is emerging? Because actually that's the challenge that I think we're all contending with, is finding our way back to each other through these big system shifts that are going on. It's not for the faint-hearted. It's difficult and audacious work, but I hear the echoes of that work in all of the conversations that I've had with Harv, and actually in the breakout rooms that we've had so far. I think that's me.
Anya, thank you. Thank you. And I love when we first talked and you said to me, fuck, I'm finding it hard to love my country right now. You know, it was just, and you still showed up. So thank you so much for that, Anya. Okay, so now I'm going to pass over to Finn.
Amazing. Gosh, I have a lot of thoughts. They're all very disconnected. I think I might start by just acknowledging, and I feel like this might be shared with others on the call, this whole chat feels very vulnerable. And there is a certain exhaustion, I think, that comes, at least for me, with that, given how much has been going on, both within our own country and within the world at large. So just want to acknowledge everyone for showing up despite all of that. Where to begin? I think, so I started this call by proposing the framework, or a potential framework, around individualism and collectivism. And Anya used a term that I think challenges that entire notion a little bit. So I just want to explore that. Nationalism. Where do nationalists sit on the spectrum of individualism to collectivism? They certainly would not think that they sit as individualists, whereas a lot of their behavior is, by definition, othering. And I think plenty of people on the call today, at the very least, would consider New Zealand and the people of New Zealand to be people who have values of inclusion and accepting diversity with open arms, not just by letting people into one's home, but ensuring that the pavements and roads between everyone's homes are well forged and everyone can commingle. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I think there's a lot going on at the moment that calls for the question of, what does it mean to love one's country? Do we need to also love the protesters who set up Parliament for nearly a month? If so, what does that love look like? And what does that call for? What are we responsible to do in light of that? And then looking further afield with Ukraine, what are we as a nation responsible for there? What do we need to do in order to ensure that we can still love our country and the people of our country in light of everything that's happening across the ditch there? I do not know. Maybe that's for call number 2. To go to a slightly more practical, potentially practical note, a tangent nonetheless, I've been thinking a lot recently about how technology plays a part in all of this. And the first breakout room that I was a part of had 2 very inspiring technologists in it. And there's a concept that's kind of been growing a lot recently that can fall under the umbrella of Web3. So I'll very briefly, I don't know how much time I've got, but I'll very briefly go through Web 2 and Web 3 and how that, the concepts within that might serve to redefine what country means to people. So Web 2 is very vertical. It's Amazon, it's Facebook, it's Google, it's the big organization hosting the little individual. And there's a certain dependence there, there's a lack of control and power, and it's very much a collective through a central authority. Web 3 is decentralized. It's the whole kind of blockchain kind of concept taken to the nth degree, where people are in control of their own information. It's incredibly portable. But I think some of the key concepts that resonate with me around all of that in relation to this chat are the concepts of individualism through collectivism, which kind of, similar to the concept of nationalism, disintegrates that entire spectrum. So if we think of individualism as actions and desires for me, and collectivism as actions and desires for us, we can achieve individualism through collectivism. And I think that is something that's worth considering as well when thinking about how can we love our country, is service unto others to ensure that we can also love ourselves. I might just close it there.
Thank you. And I am not into technology, but I'm very excited about Web3 and the move away from the capitalist systems that we've put in play. And I think it is a big deal for us going forward. And now I'm going to ask Faumuina to come on.
Kia ora koutou mā. So there's always a good thing about, you know, coming in later and hearing everybody. I was reflecting on a couple of things, and I'm just going to pick up when you were talking, Finn. What was really rising for me is this, you know, we're raised with this idea around individualism and independence being, that's what makes you a mature human. And yet, you know, so me being Samoan, and really interdependence is the greater goal, and how you could serve interdependence more by, like, I guess, increasing your skills and your ability to do that. And, you know, and ideas of, you know, we say reciprocity or bartering, but that sharing across of resource, and which makes for resilience, you know, and even here, well, I know the last time someone offered me funeral insurance, I said, oh, but I'm Samoan. And they went, oh, yeah, okay, that's right. And, you know, there's like, yeah, you guys are just going to look after each other. You don't need funeral insurance. And so how interdependence, if you elevate that and you see that as a system, that and how that all works. And I think there's something really beautiful in that. Now, of course, I operate within Aotearoa and in these other ways, but then, of course, interdependence is actually a big part of my work and all the people that are brought into my work. There's so much of that in, I guess, how we might have internships and how we try and, you know, raise the level of knowledge within our team. The other part that was coming up for me is, and this is a saying that comes from the waka, it comes from our navigator, Hoturua Barclay Kerr, and he says that a navigator's job is to find opportunity in adversity. Now, I often use this, you know, when I'm working with entrepreneurs or, you know, sort of organizations, non-for-profits and that, but I think about it in the context of tolerance. And maybe, I mean, aroha is always a kind of, I think sometimes Hollywood's ruined, you know, what is aroha, for instance, but, you know, so how do we find the opportunity to understand so myself, I wasn't pro-protest, how do I find the opportunity to understand them more, to support them more, to try and think about where does that come from, because I had friends who was in those protests. And a great example I saw during the Tuia 250 voyage, which I was part of, I was sailing during that time, when we sailed into Gisborne, so the government, the central government wasn't really in charge, as was one of the local trusts that had been set up, and it was at that time a beautiful woman called Glenys Barbara Phillips. And what she did for the protesters is give them a marquee and water coolers and something to sit on. And so she used the expression of manaakitanga on their whenua to say, and you can't just say it in the media, that your voice is welcomed. You know, everyone has a right to protest. If we are giving away hot dogs while you give people vaccinations, because then they feel appreciated and loved, then how do we show the values of aroha as a team of 5 million to those who show up and they've also been feeling marginalized, feeling like they're not part of the 5 million? We're all on the waka. These people, we can't throw them off the waka, literally. So if they're all still on the waka, how do we continue to show leadership? And this is the bit where I think for leadership, where you find the opportunity to understand where they're coming from. And I think maybe if we'd done that a little bit earlier, before it became a shit show, then possibly we wouldn't have got that big escalation. And maybe too, then it would have derailed some of what was, you know, I think there was some nefarious kind of characters behind lots of things that were going on there. So it would have been derailing to have a government to say, just like, I guess understanding, and sometimes the word whakapapa, you know, of our bloodlines, but what is the whakapapa of those people who are standing there? And how do we find tolerance and love and empathy for them? And like Shay was saying earlier, like doing the hard stuff, having the hard conversations in there. I mean, you know, and I understand why they get angry at media, because they just rush in and they take the one picture of something going bad, and then that's what goes out. But actually, you know, I think, yeah, and there was that whole binary that was already happening at the very start of that you know, I don't want to say anti-vax, is a useless term, but people who, for whatever reason, didn't want to be vaccinated, suddenly we had a binary within our country. And I think, like, again, unhelpful. So the ways that we find love is understanding love is a very complex and forgiving and accepting emotion. And I think it's like Hoti says, we find the opportunity to express that. We find it, and once we find that opportunity, how do we bring it into the system? So they're not just felt like, oh, you're just saying that so you can make it shut up. You know, how do we systematize some of that and still make it, I guess, sincere? So, I mean, that would bring a lot of love for me in this country. The other thing would bring a lot of love for me for this country is to also recognize the struggle that's happening in West Papua and how it's so similar to Ukraine, that they are just being run over. How can, I'm just going to go on this now, how can Papua New Guinea have a population of 8 million, the other half of that landmass a population of 4 million? You know, when colonization happened in those countries, they were even. And so there is something that is dark and sinister and happening there. And why aren't there the sanctions? You know, and it's not their fault that they are dark colored, you know, because we've seen all the racism that's appeared with the Ukraine. It's like, how could that happen in Ukraine and Europe? You know, usually this is West Africa, or usually this is like, you know, in those nations. And I think that's a part of me that I feel also that, you know, Aotearoa sometimes dips into its British history a bit too strongly and does not recognize how the DNA in this country came from the Moana, came from the Pacific and voyaging, and that's the DNA that we should be honoring, because it's the only place it can be done, you know. So yeah, I'd find a lot of love for everybody if that was happening. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Faumuina F. So we're going to change the program now because of you. Well done. That's fabulous. So I'll try to connect with the other peeps in the session, and we've run out of time to get feedback from them, so I'm just going to do it. We were going to go into breakout now, but I think I'd like to stay in this conversation here that Faumuina has opened up and go to the crowd now and take some questions here. Eric, are you okay with that? We'll just stay here, yeah? And I just think going into the breakout rooms, because Faumuina, that was just a stunning way to finish the session. So, deep breath, and what I'm going to invite people to do is, if you've got any questions you want to put to the panelists or to the group now, please. Okay, what's come up for you? Either put your hand up or put them in the chat, because I don't want to lose the energy that sits in the room here right now. What wonderful storytellers from anybody. Or I'm going to pick somebody. Thank you. Rosalie, let's go to you.
Thank you, Harv. First of all, Faumuina, that was a really beautiful kōrero, so thank you. I felt there was much that was expressed there. But what actually came up for me is we need to be able to have some gritty conversations. And a part of that is that so often we tend to feel that disagreement is akin to conflict. And actually, if you can raise the conversation to find the points of commonality, the principles on which you agree, and recognize that you may have preferences that are quite fundamentally different underneath it, then you can begin to come together. That's been that was part of what that came for me, and I'm in total agreement with you. What if there had been conversations that had been had earlier within those protests? And where I struggle a little bit with this, I had a conversation the other day with somebody who was so diametrically opposed to almost every view that I could have held. And it was triggering me all over the place. I was finding my hands clenched in my pockets and my body language was tense. But what actually came through that was actually just asking questions over 45 minutes and coming to actually really care for the person, irrespective of the fact that he held completely diametric, in some cases totally different values to what I did, but was very sincere and authentic in the holding of those values. So the challenge to me is how do I move forward as an individual and as a leader to be able to open myself up to all of those areas of conflict and be able to find the pathways through and where there is alignment and accept what is true for all of us in principle, whilst accepting the diversity of preference. Does that make sense?
Okay, while we're waiting for questions, so you just press a little reactions and there's a little hand comes. Oh, Anya! Look at you, what a good girl.
Have a little, I really want to acknowledge how difficult that feels at the moment. And Faumuina, you were speaking about West Papua and how yuck it feels to have this kind of outpouring of solidarity with the people of Ukraine, which, you know, we should be feeling in equal measure for the people of Colombia, for the people of Libya, for the people of West Papua, and somehow there's been this just complete focus around Ukraine, which is, I mean, it's disturbing on lots of different levels. And I wonder if, you know, when I think about that, about what that says about our ability to kind of empathize and connect with issues, to connect with people, that there's a lot that needs to be inquired into and unmade in ourselves. in terms of how we see the world, like the fact that we have all, you know, there's been an avalanche of discourse around, you know, the need to show solidarity and support for the people of Ukraine, and yet there are all these other conflicts that are, you know, equally as abhorrent going on around the world. Yeah, and to me, that kind of, it brings back the hospice, right? Like, what do we need to unmake in ourselves in order to perceive things, the depth of things, the complexity of things. And to me, that is very much like, it makes me think about where we're at in Aotearoa right now, this kind of, what do we need to unmake in ourselves in order to find our way back into relationship with those who have, you know, maybe transgressed what you know, our own values, have acted in opposition to the things that we hold dear. Like, how do we unmake? And that's a question for me as much as a question that I'm posing to all of you, because I, you know, in terms of white supremacists and nationalist forces at work, kind of organising that protest, I'm finding that really difficult. Yeah.
Thank you, Anya. And Shelley Ashton, you had your hand up apparently. I didn't see it.
Yes, sorry, and I've sort of been concentrating so hard, I've lost my train of thought for my question, but I'll try and kick my brain into gear. So probably referencing some of your recent writings about ecosystems and leadership and so on, and how, you know, we are all part of an ecosystem and we all work together, but within that ecosystem, or within nature, on a wider scale, isn't there conflict and fight and cruelty and inequality and inequity? And isn't that something that we need to accept or acknowledge, that is part of how we live, that is part of being human, that's part of nature and our own ecosystem? And I know we're here looking at better ways and how we address the things that we feel are wrong, but maybe there's a fundamental discussion on, you know, who decides what's wrong. Does that make any sense? I hope I've sort of made sense with that suggestion. Just that we are part of maybe a wider concept, which is not just about disagreeing. Has that made any sense at all, or not?
It's got me thinking. So yes, it's made sense. Absolutely, it has. Absolutely.
And I know it's more fundamental than what we're addressing today, but it just strikes me because I really enjoyed your recent writing about the ecosystem and the leadership and the journey you went on in, I think it was Mount Bruce, Pukaha, and so that sort of got my brain ticking over very slowly, but it's still got it ticking over.
And thank you. Look, it's and one of the things I was taught with by Margaret Kouvelis some years ago is that I don't have a response to you right now, Shelley, but the question has landed, and I'm just acknowledging the time. We've got 8 minutes left, okay, and we're not going to run over time. And I'm going to go. So I'll follow up with that. I'm going to go to Faumuina's got a question for Rosalie's, an answer for Rosalie's question. And Hannah Smith is going to give us some guidance on how to finish this, remembering that there is a follow-up next week, okay? So this is the beginning of the chat for that. So I'm going to go to Faumuina first to answer Rosalie's question. Amanda, I see you, your hands up. I'm not sure we're going to get there today, but go, Faumuina.
Kia ora, I'll be real quick. Rosalie, I was thinking about that, and our organisation's done a similar journey. We've done a 10-week anti-racism course on how to have difficult conversations. And I think what came from that for me, there's both becoming a student of, you know, this type of love and tolerance that we talk about, and and then becoming a teacher of it, because that's how we increase it around. I mean, you're a leader, you've got people who follow you, and I think that's really what we're all tasked with, is you know, how do we refine our skills? And I think it's only from the practice of it, because first of all, you know, it can be shocking, and then you get a little bit better at it, and then you become a bit more better at it, and that's when you become a teacher of it. So that's what I'd advocate for, you know, those who are in leadership positions, to take it on, not be surprised by these difficult conversations, but actually become a student of them.
Lovely. Danny,
Just to throw into that, Faumuina, thank you. I think part of the most interesting part for me is actually realizing your blind spots, and actually realizing there's attitudes and mindsets that have been embedded from childhood that you don't even recognize within yourself. And that's a part of the challenge to the journey. Thank you.
Completely. And Danny, you just had a quick question. You had a quick question, and Amanda's put a hand down. You had a quick question for Finn. Finn, have you spotted that?
Yeah, I was just trying to type out the answer so that we could keep the chat going in main, but I guess I can try to answer it very quickly here. So the question is, in Danny's experience outside of forums like the one that we're in now, a lot of more mature people aren't even necessarily sure what a value is. And when he's asked them what the top 5 values are, they have listed just skills. Whereas typically in his experience with Gen Z and the like, they know exactly how to answer and they hit the nail on the head. Firstly, I am in like a pretty deep echo chamber, not only around age, but also around like perspective and outlook. So in my experience, most of the people I talk to, I think, are very confident in their values. And that I feel quite privileged to be able to say, but also have to acknowledge that that might be a bit dangerous, because I could well be blind to the majority of Kiwis. So acknowledging that echo chamber, that kind of invalidates anything I'm about to say. I do think that, like, broadly speaking, that could be the case, but values in and of themselves are very difficult to define. They're by nature quite amorphous, I think. Regardless of whether you even agree on another person's sense of values, you might disagree entirely on how they define values in general. So yeah, it's one of the things that I've noticed today, and this is going on a bit of a tangent, but with the nature of discourse, I think a big first step that we all need to take if we're thinking about how do we engage in discourse with our fellow country humans, how do we even start speaking the same language? And I'm not talking about English or Te Reo, I'm talking about the meaning behind any of the words that we're using, and the assumption of people's intent as well. That was a very rambling answer, sorry, Danny, but I hope I touched on at least some of it.
Yes or no would have been fun.
Thanks, Finn.
Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Hannah Smith, preparing us for next week. Hannah.
Kia ora koutou, and thanks so much to everybody for your great contributions and your thinking. It's been such a rich session. So I've been in listening mode, thinking about where to from here. What do we do next week, as the invitation is to meet again next week, and we would love for you to do so. So just to finish off, I'd like to invite your response to today, and we're going to do this in a very specific way. So I'm going to give you a question in a moment, and I'd like you to write, if you're able to, in the chat box, your instinctive response to this question. But don't press return to show me your hands, so that we can all have a free thinking time without being influenced by other people's answers. So we're just going to give you 30 seconds to compose whatever it is that you are walking away with, and or what you would like to see in our time together next time, just to give us some material to begin with. If you're not able to type, just take these 30 seconds to breathe. Like, there's been a lot in the last couple of hours, a lot to think about, but we really would love to give you this opportunity to respond. So I'm going to put the questions in the chat just now. What are you walking away with as you leave today? And or what do you hope for from the time we spend together next week? When you've done your response, show me your hands. Don't press return. That's the key bit of this activity. So we'll get a lovely waterfall at the end when we all press return at the same time. Oh, lots of hands already. That's amazing. You can also do other things with your hands if you just need to stretch. I definitely need to stretch. Yeah, nice one, Finn. Little eyeballs, little hats. Do some dancing. Just waiting for a few more.
Rosalie's typing forever, finally.
And I know this is hard, right? Because like, I don't know about you, but my brain is just exploding after all those great provocations and questions. So just 10 more seconds. And also feel free to send us thoughts afterwards, because we got a week to think about this. Oh, Erica, I love your heart. Little aroha heart. Maybe that's the one we all
How do you
need.
do that? Never. Mine sort of gets all mushy.
There we go. Got a few hearts. All right. I think we've got a few responses there. So 3, 2, 1, press return, everybody. Thank you so much. Do take a few moments just to have a scroll through those. And when you're ready, Harv, over to you to close us all out.
Thank you. Well, actually, I'm going to, before I do that, I'm going to go back to Rarity to close off with a karakia. But before I do that, this was an initiation. Next week, we would like to follow up and look at what do we do, as Joe says, reimagine the future and create it. It's a wonderful time now. We've been given this wonderful opportunity right now to bring to life something different with this. So please join us next week at 12:30. And Ra, over to you to finish. And Erica, if we can save these chats, please, would be wonderful. Thank you. Rarity.
Kia ora mai, nā tēnā tātou mi ngā mihi o te wā kia koutou katoa, I te nui o te kōrero kua whakawāriki hia. Tēnei tō tātēnei taku kia pai ai tō tātēnei hoki ngāti. Whakatau mai whakatau mai taku kura ki te poho, miri ai te ringa E oho te mauri o te whare whakatau ai oe. E piki te oranga mana hoa kia tū moko puna ahau e. Kia pai tō koutou hoki ngātu. Ngā mihi.
Thank you, Ra.